There exists a forum beyond that which is known to man. A place that sits between truth and the lies which we choose to believe. A dimension ruled by the shadowy depths of human nature and those who turn a blind eye to it. Submitted for your approval. No sleep. Picture, if you will, a town just up the road from nowhere. A rest stop on a road equally deserted, and a woman trapped not only in her mind, but perhaps something more. They say a dream takes only a second or so, and in that second a man can live a lifetime. But what takes residence in your mind the rest of the night? 2 days ago, I found out. I haven't slept since. It's not that I don't want to sleep, believe me. My eyes have been a dull, bloodshot red for the last 25 hours, my hands shake of their own accord, my vision blurs and fades sporadically. But I can't go back to sleep. I can't go back there. I can't stop thinking about that place, despite the fact that I couldn't even tell you where I was this very moment. I know generally, I guess, but I couldn't tell you where the nearest gas station was. I couldn't point you towards the pharmacy or let you know how close the ball field would be. The past 2 days I've spent driving, mostly. I've been sitting here for a couple hours, though. I didn't really feel safe behind the wheel after the first 40. I must look like a lunatic, sitting here at a rest stop right up the road from nowhere, staring into space. Fingers wrapped around my hair, my necklace, fidgeting with the frayed ends of my worn, graying sweater. Typing this, I guess. I feel like I'm being followed. I know they couldn't have followed me here, but I know that they're waiting for me to come back. To that place. I'll try to describe it to you, I promise, but my inability to express the abject terror I felt will, if anything, be more merciful to anyone who happens to read this. When they talk about a fate they wouldn't wish on their worst enemy, this is the one. I don't know how I saw it. I don't know how I went there, and I really don't think I was supposed to. What I saw there, that place, it wasn't meant for me. For us. For people like us, I guess. Living, breathing, sentient people. People with jobs, with families, with mortgages, with pets. No. This isn't something we were supposed to see. But I saw it anyway, and I can't get it out of my mind. I've always been a fairly heavy sleeper. My mom was always concerned I would sleep through a fire alarm. My family used to joke about it until I literally slept through a smoke alarm going off my first year of college. But despite being known for my ability to sleep, I never dreamed. Well, at least I think I never dreamed. Someone told me once that we're always dreaming, but we usually forget whatever it was by the time we wake up. I never really bought that theory, but I'd give anything to forget it all now. Anything. I used to envy my friends who would talk about the wild dreams they had. I used to watch videos on YouTube about lucid dreaming, how to dream everything under the sun, but I never knew just how lucky I was. Everyone has their own theory on what dreams mean. People will psychoanalyze everything you remember. My old therapist once told me that I needed more vitamin D in my diet because I had a dream about water. Just proves what a hack those guys are. I made that up entirely. I said I didn't dream, but that's not the whole truth. I rarely dream. There's one dream I do remember, though. It's not one I ever told my mom or a therapist or my friends at a slumber party. I never really thought of it as a nightmare, and I never fully appreciated its meaning until 2 nights ago. So here, let me clear the air for you. Stop wasting your time on therapists, stop wasting money on truth tellers and seers of the great beyond. I know what your dreams mean. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Nada. Zilch. Goose egg. Zero. If you watch a horror movie, you'll probably have a dream about it at some point. If you have a big test, you'll dream about a big test. If you dream about sleeping with the woman of your dreams, maybe going out on a date, even getting married, it's probably because you want to do those things with the woman of your dreams. See the pattern? This isn't rocket science, people. Just because dreams don't really have much meaning, though, doesn't mean they don't serve a purpose. There's a difference there between meaning and purpose, a little gray sliver, something everyone overlooks. It's easy to overlook. Everything feels real in a dream. No matter how bizarre, your brain is remarkably talented at convincing itself that everything is alright. But you guys don't know the purpose of dreams. Everyone wants to know the meaning, but nobody asks about the purpose. That's good. Honestly, I'd be better off if I didn't know. But 2 days ago, I found out anyway. Dreams are a cover, a cloak, a guise. They're there to hide something. You dream whether or not you remember it because the alternative would drive you insane. I'm patient zero in that regard. Like I said, there's one dream I remember. I first had it when I was 6. It was the night before my first day of elementary school, and I remember being tucked into bed by my parents. I didn't dream about reading or maths or being embarrassed in front of the class. I wasn't scared about leaving my parents or making new friends. I dreamt of a room. That's it. An empty room. Concrete walls, concrete floor, concrete ceiling, no definite light source, but everything was reasonably illuminated. No windows or doors, but I never stopped to think how I got there. Remember, it all seems reasonable in a dream. You only think about that kind of stuff after you wake up. I remember sitting in that room. The concrete floor never felt cold, I never felt uncomfortable, and bizarrely enough, I never felt scared. That was it. I woke up, went to school, did that another 150 times, did that for the next 12 years, and boom, here we are, sitting in a lounge just north of whatever faceless, nameless town you care to ascribe to it, feeling the cold plastic seat pressed against my back, fiddling with the silver necklace my mom had given me on my 12th birthday. But every now and then, I'd have that dream again. The exact same dream. Well, not exactly the same dream, but it was the same place. That I'm sure of. After the 3rd or 4th time, when I was maybe 8 or 9 years old, it began to comfort me, somewhat. My parents were going through a divorce, and every night when I went to bed, I would hope I'd see the room that night. I'd hope for solace, for comfort, for something steady. A literal rock, a literal set of concrete walls, something I could put my hand on and know that it wouldn't disappear. And sure enough, I would see it. Not always, maybe not even every few months, but the more I focused on it, the more I saw it. Each time was a bit different, though. It used to be silent in that room. There was no hum of a fluorescent strip, no low whir of circulating air, not even my movements along the smooth floor elicited so much as a whisper of friction from my fingertips. That was how it was at the start, at least. At some point, I heard a noise. It was soft, like someone was trying to speak to me through 1,000 layers of cotton. If I focused, I could hear something that almost resembled a voice, though that might just have been my brain playing tricks on me. I never figured out if cognitive biases existed in a dream, but that's not really here or there. The point is, the room got louder. By the time I turned 13, there were readily audible noises when I returned to that room. Definitely speaking, though I never knew what language. Again, didn't even register as a problem when I'm there. There, it made perfect sense. It didn't matter that I couldn't understand, I just knew that everything was as it should be. When I turned 15, I stopped seeing it. I stopped having the dream. My waking memory of the room began to fade as 1, then 2 years passed without a return visit. I thought about it sometimes, though. The room. I know I said I was never scared there, but that started to bother me. Why wasn't I scared? Why didn't I tell anyone? I was trapped in a solid concrete room that both broke the laws of known physics and had no way to leave, never mind figure out how I got in, and yet, I never considered the fact that a return to my own very not concrete, very physics-obeying, pink-walled, carpeted room would ever be an issue. Dreams always seemed like a guaranteed round-trip deal. I was always going to come back. I never had any reason to think otherwise until 2 nights ago. I tried calculating it, and I think it's been around 1,200 days and at least close to that many nights. Well, can't forget the all-nighters before finals, since I saw that room. I'm not sure if the math is good on that calculation. I just scribbled some numbers on a napkin and racked my brain as best I could. Jesus, now that I'm typing that up, I know I look crazy. The girl with the bloodshot eyes, twitchy hands, and scribbled on napkins. I'm wearing a worn out gray sweatshirt too. Definitely not dressed to impress. Yeah, no red flags at all. 2 nights since I slept doesn't seem so bad, especially marked against 1200 since I'd really remembered a dream. But 2 nights ago, I was back. I was there. In the room I had first seen 12, maybe 13 years ago. It was the same as I had seen it then, too. No noise this time. No mysterious voices to decipher, no light source despite even illumination around the place. No noise at all. No echoes to bounce between the solid concrete walls, the smooth concrete floor, no noise escaping from the heavy metal door directly in front of me. The heavy metal door directly in front of me. I hadn't remembered that part. I was back in the only dream I'd ever had my whole life, but for the first time, something was really different. But I didn't care. I had lived lifetimes in that room, or at least I thought I had. And yet this tall, steel windowless door felt as normal as if it had been my bedroom door at my parents' house, back when they were still together. I know I should have been scared, but I wasn't. There was no temperature in that room, there was no shadow, there was no texture. It was empty, it was blank, it was solid. It was the most perfectly consistent place I had ever known. But here was a door. Much like every other time I'd seen this place, I wasn't worried about getting out. I wasn't worried about where the door led, or why there wasn't a light, or why the noises I so clearly remembered were gone. Everything felt normal. Your brain has a funny way of making you feel like that. My brother used to tell me about the Vomit Comet, a plane that for a brief time could let you experience weightlessness. He was obsessed with space, astronauts, NASA, the whole shebang. Couldn't get enough of it. He would tell me how it works, something about parabolic flight. I don't really remember much. He would tell me that you're likely to throw up because your organs aren't used to being lifted up like that. You could get used to it, he said. After all, astronauts aren't constantly losing their lunch. That's the funny thing about the human body. It's programmed from birth to know when things are wrong. Getting hurt does just that. It hurts, to let you know that something has gone terribly wrong. If you stop experiencing the 1G you're used to, your body is going to be kind of concerned why. Maybe your stomach freaks out, but eventually, you teach yourself what the new normal is. It always felt like that to me in the room, except there was no adjustment period. There was no moment of parabolic ascension where 1.8 Gs turn to 0, where my stomach churns and my throat tightens. There was just the calm of restabilizing. That room was normal to me, whatever normal meant. And now, that door was part of it. I never felt ill, I never felt queasy. Despite it being so different, it felt exactly the same to me. What did I do in an empty room with nowhere to go? I sat there with my thoughts. Whatever a thought within a dream could even be considered. There wasn't anything else to do, and it felt completely natural to mind my own. So, what do you do with a door? Well, you go through it. They say hindsight is 20/20, but I always thought that referred to a bad decision, something contentious, a risk you shouldn't have taken, a decision you made to override that part of your brain saying, "Red alert, do not do this." But there wasn't anything like that in the room. Why would there be a door if not to open? Seems reasonable enough. So I stood. I realized I had never stood up in that room before, but I wasn't particularly fazed by the change in perspective. I stood up and I walked over to the door. Humans innately understand natural physics, what feels right and what doesn't. Yet I wasn't bothered by my silent steps. I wasn't bothered by the stillness of the air or the fact that my breathing had slowed to a stop. This was the norm, new or not. But when I reached the door, it changed. I lifted my hand from my side and wrapped my fingers around the metal handle. The metal felt cool to the touch and I recoiled slightly. It felt cold, almost. This was not the norm. I couldn't tell if it was a new norm or an old norm or the farthest thing from normal, but something in my brain started to fire. Something in my brain registered an outlier, one of my senses finding something in a place where nothing reigned supreme. I continued. I could almost feel myself trying to rationalize this new sensation, to work this texture and temperature into what I knew was normal. I felt myself turning the handle downward, though I can't remember ever deciding to. There was a slight creak, a new noise, a data point to try and fit in, a new piece of a puzzle that I thought was complete. I pulled slowly on the handle, stepping back so as to avoid the wide arc of the large metal barrier. I could feel my heart beat faster. That was odd. As I broke the seal between door and frame, I breathed sharply. I definitely heard that. My breath, that is. I heard it, and I was starting to breathe a bit faster. I kept pulling. When I was in elementary school, I used to sneak out of bed sometimes. When I still lived with my parents, my dad had a habit of leaving chips out on the counter. I would sneak out of my room once I thought they had gone to sleep. I would creep down the stairs, avoiding the creaky left side of the third step from the bottom, and softly land on the hardwood floor below. I would walk down the hallway and reach for the doorknob second on the right, the kitchen. I remember turning the knob, which was always a little bit loose, and ever so carefully pulling the door open, watching the soft light creep out into the hallway from beyond the hinges. Now that I think about it, maybe my dad would do it intentionally. Leave the light on, I mean. Why else would he leave a snack and the light on? It doesn't matter. I can't think about that too much now. I still miss him. When I was pulling that steel door in that perfectly empty room, there was no soft light stretching onto the concrete. There was no sense at all of what might lay just beyond my line of sight behind this swinging barrier, but there was shadow. Shadow that crept slowly into my eyes. Shadow that, like the room I stood in, had no definite source but felt more real than I could explain in the time I have. I kept pulling. You know, when I was in middle school, I got bullied a lot, mostly by other girls. Nothing they said really mattered. They'd make comments about my hair or my shoes or about boys that might like me. Even a couple years out, their catty remarks wouldn't register so much as an iota of concern, but at the time, they were everything. That was my world. I remember staying up one night, crying until the early hours of the morning, my mom just watching me from her bed. Maybe I was upset about something else. Maybe she was upset too. It doesn't really matter now. Just like it always does, normal would soon change. And finally, the door swung open, past my face, with a slight rush of air, leaving an unobstructed view beyond the room I knew so well. A room I did realize couldn't exist, but a room I was more familiar with than my own at times. And then, I looked out beyond. I expected it to be nothing. Empty space, darkness, the absence of anything. Wouldn't that have been nice? I remember my 9th grade English class. I had to write an essay on Lord of the Flies and how fear plays an important role in the story. I wrote my essay on the fear of the unknown because it was about more than the book. It was about my life, and about that gray area between two very different normals. I was never afraid in that room because, if nothing else, that room was certain. The walls, the floor, the nothing. It was a guarantee. My return to the real world was a certainty, and I'll take an empty certainty over any emotional, deceptive bullshit any day of the week. I got a B- on that essay. Probably should have focused more on the book. There was no shift in normal when I opened that door. There was no sense of certainty. No amount of mental acrobatics could convince me that this was okay. There was something there. Something moving. My junior year physics teacher told my class that darkness, that black, was the absence of light. They didn't know what that meant. I do now. Unless shocked, somehow, like by a fire alarm or maybe a bright light, your brain doesn't do a whole lot of external perception while you're sleeping. Was I sleeping? Though, that sense of certainty had faded. This was not normal, but I wasn't waking up. My shallow breathing told me I was awake, but my brain was still trying to convince me I was asleep, that this was a dream, that this was normal. So I stood there. I stood there, one hand on the worn-out wooden frame, eyes peeking around the corner into the living room, watching them fight. I was 7, I think. I stood there and I closed my eyes. I relied on my senses and my imagination. I heard breaking glass, maybe a scream, the sharp smack of an open palm, sobbing. I stood there, hands still clutching the cold steel handle of that mysterious door. I did not close my eyes. I did not need to imagine. I stood there, and I watched it unfold. The mind is a dangerous thing without external influence, and I was as isolated as possible. No bright sunlight would shine through my window, no harsh alarm would make me arise for school. I was truly alone with my thoughts, and I had never felt more unsafe. What I saw was nothing. The back of a child's eyelids, the underside of a desk, the rough wood grain of a kitchen door, its handle loosened by repeated slamming. They say a dream takes only a second, and in that second a man can live a lifetime. I had known that room my whole life, and in that room I had lived 1,000 lives 1,000 times over. As I stared beyond that door, I lived every one of them at once. Every life, every decision, every memory, and every partition came crumbling. Every emotional blockade fell to ashes, and I relived the worst that life has to offer in an instant that lasted an eternity. Time is cruel. It punishes. That was my dad's favorite quote from Top Gun. He always said I was too young to watch it with him. I wonder if he'd still say that now. But this wasn't real. This door wasn't real. The room, the concrete, my white-knuckled grasp. This wasn't real. And so instead of reality, I was confronted with the worst of myself. My imagination. What my brain tried so desperately to rationalize when I closed my eyes, when I covered my ears, when I fell asleep sobbing into my pillow. I wasn't meant to see this. It wasn't for me. But I saw it anyway. And like that, I felt myself calm. I began to feel like things were returning to normal. The darkest parts of my own contrived terror played out before me, but I wasn't concerned. The uncertainty began to fade, and that emotion led to a sense of finality, a sense of certainty, assurance. I wasn't concerned about how I would leave this place, how I would find my way out of a room with no windows and a single door that only led deeper. And for the first time, that certainty was terrifying. It was suffocating. My throat contracted, my hands began to tremble, my eyes began to water. It had been a few years since I had cried. This wasn't a few years ago, though. This wasn't high school. This wasn't my old home, my old family. This was the new norm, and it filled me with a sense of overwhelming dread, a dread I could not control. So I accepted it. Just like that night before first grade, I wasn't scared of how I would get back. I knew how I got here this time, and I knew that it was not on a round-trip ticket. I was trapped in a cage of my own mind, confronting what I had failed to confront my entire life, and I could not escape it. I couldn't wake up in a cold sweat and rush to my parents' room, even if they had a room for me to run to. As I stared out at every repressed emotion, every memory, every construct of the broken life I had lived, playing on loop 1,000 times a second, every second its own twisted, horrible lifetime, I could hear the conductor make his last call. I knew there would be no return service. Of this, I was certain. It was December. Not late December, not by New Year's or even Christmas, but December nonetheless. Cold. Desolate. Forests of dead trees and colored lights, crowds hiding increasing emotional distress behind a facade of pasted smiles and sugar cookies. The road was empty. It usually was. It's hard to find people just south of nowhere, and even harder this time of year. As the hum of an engine and the low rush of tires on dirt drew closer, a beat-up white and blue sedan pulled off onto the small dirt shoulder of the forsaken road. The responding officer glanced over his windshield as the car's tires slowly rolled to a halt, and he reached for his radio. "Hey, Chief, looks like we got a 1052 a ways down Mulebrook. Maybe 10 miles before the rest stop. Feel free to send an ambulance, but it doesn't look like that's going to make a difference." The police officer opened his car door and stepped out onto the dirt-covered road. He closed his door and began walking toward the wreckage. "Yeah, looks like a 1050. Single driver accident. Doesn't look good. I'll report back in a minute." The officer tucked his walkie-talkie back into his waistband and stepped toward the lightly smoking car. The hood was bent out of shape. Half the frame was wrapped around a tree just off the road. The roof had crumpled in from a pillar failure, the airbags had gone off, and most of the windows were blown out from the impact. The officer stepped carefully around the stray pieces of twisted bumper and broken glass, approaching the driver's side door of the vehicle. He didn't need to open the door. It was 1 a.m. and the flashing red and blue lights cast ominous shadows to the surrounding trees, rays dancing like twisted Christmas lights between the frosted branches. One victim, the officer said to the dispatcher, female, maybe 18 or 19 years old, seems to be wearing a silver chain necklace, gray sweatshirt, face not readily identifiable, he added. This one's been here for a while, maybe a day or more. Nobody comes around these parts much, and we only just got a call this evening. Have the boys come check it out. I'll let the unit do its thing. The officer walked back to his car, pulled away from the scene, and made his way back to the station. After a quick check-in, he left for the night and made the half-hour commute to his own home. His own family. His return was a certainty. He tried to forget the gruesome scene he responded to, and eventually, like any bad dream, he did. But before the welcoming arms of his wife and children left his mind blank of worry, he thought about the mangled body he had seen. He tried to rationalize the situation, to find his own answer to a question he never wanted to ask, a question he couldn't fully understand until it was too late. Maybe a drunk driver. Maybe she fell asleep at the wheel. Either way, with a crash like that, he figured it was a quick death. He hoped it was, at least. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come, well, she knew. She certainly knew now. There wasn't much paperwork back at the station. A blank grave, an empty ceremony. No living family to notify, nowhere to return the silver necklace they recovered from the scene. The post office won't deliver to the address they're looking for. A cold, desolate concrete room, somewhere just up the road from nowhere. A routine flight becomes anything but for a man truly alone in this world and soon to be alone in the next. Won't you join us next week for episode 2 of Late Night?